Before humans built houses for the living, they may have started making places for the dead. Before writing, before temples, before kings, before anyone carved a name into stone, someone looked at a body on the ground and decided it should not simply be left there. That body could no longer hunt. It could no longer speak. It could no longer protect the group, gather food, hold a child, or answer when its name was called. For most animals, that would have been the end. The living would move on. The body would return to the earth by itself. But humans did something different. They stayed. They dug into the ground. They carried the body carefully. They placed it in a pit, a cave, or a chosen place. Sometimes they folded the knees close to the chest. Sometimes they covered the body with red pigment. Sometimes they placed tools, shells, animal bones, beads, flowers, food, or weapons beside it. Then they covered the body and walked away. But they did not really leave it behind. That is the strange thing about burial. It is not only what humans did with the dead, it is what the dead began doing to the living. Because the moment humans started burying bodies, death stopped being only a biological event. It became memory, it became ritual, it became grief, it became meaning. And maybe, for the first time, humans were not only trying to survive the world, they were trying to understand what it meant to lose someone inside it. So why did humans start burying the dead? The answer is not one thing. It was not only religion, it was not only hygiene, it was not only fear of animals, and it was not only love. Burial solved three ancient problems at once. It protected the living from the body, it protected the dead from being forgotten, and it gave grief something to do with its hands. If you placed the earliest clues on a map, they would not form one straight line. They would appear like sparks across the ancient world. Spain, South Africa, the Levant, Kenya, Iraq, Russia. Different lands, different kinds of humans, different moments in time, but the same strange behavior kept appearing. The dead mattered. First, Spain. At a site called Sima de los Huesos, the pit of bones, archaeologists found the remains of ancient human relatives, deep inside a cave system. The bones date to around 430,000 years ago. These were not modern humans like us. They belonged to an ancient population related to the Neanderthal line. And the question is still debated. How did so many bodies end up in that deep chamber? Maybe they fell. Maybe natural forces moved the bones. Maybe animals or cave processes played a role. But some researchers have suggested something more powerful. Maybe the bodies were placed there deliberately, not buried like later humans would bury the dead. Not with a clear grave, not with a funeral we would recognize, but carried into darkness and left in one place. And with them was a finely made hand axe, sometimes called Excalibur. Sima is not a confirmed grave. It is a clue, a dark and difficult clue. But it raises a question that is hard to ignore. If a body was only a body, why take it somewhere special? Why bring death into the deep dark of a cave? Now move the map south, to the Rising Star Cave System in South Africa. There, researchers found the remains of Homo naledi, a small-brained human relative that lived roughly between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. The bones were found deep inside difficult cave chambers. Then came a claim that shocked the world. Some researchers argued that Homo naledi may have deliberately placed their dead in the cave, maybe even buried them. If true, that would change almost everything, because Homo naledi had a brain much smaller than ours. For a long time, people assumed that complex treatment of the dead required a large modern human brain. But Homo naledi challenged that idea. Maybe the impulse to protect, hide, return to, or place the dead somewhere meaningful was older than we thought. But again, we have to be careful. The evidence is debated. Some scientists support the burial interpretation. Others argue it has not been proven. And that makes the story even more interesting, because the history of burial does not begin with certainty. It begins with bones, caves, darkness, arguments, and the uncomfortable possibility that the dead mattered before we fully understand why. If a body could no longer help the group survive, why would anyone spend energy protecting it? Now move the map east, to Qafzeh Cave in what is now Israel. Here, archaeologists found some of the clearest early Homo sapiens burials, dating to around 100,000 years ago. These were modern humans, people much closer to us. And their dead were not simply dropped into the ground. Bodies were placed in pits. Red ochre appeared near bones and tools. Some remains were arranged carefully. One child appears to have been buried with deer antlers. This is where burial becomes harder to explain as simple disposal, because digging a grave takes effort. Carrying a body takes effort. Placing objects beside it takes effort. Red ochre was not food. It was not shelter. It was not a weapon. It was color, symbol, maybe blood, maybe life, maybe transformation. We cannot know exactly what it meant to them, but the fact that they used it tells us something. The dead were no longer treated as only bodies. They were being treated as persons, as someone whose body still required attention, as someone whose absence required an answer. This does not prove religion as we know it. It does not prove gods. It does not prove a complete belief in an afterlife. But it proves something almost as important. By around 100,000 years ago, some humans were already making death meaningful. Now go back to Africa, to Qafzeh Cave, near the coast of Kenya. There, archaeologists found the burial of a child. The child was about 2.5 to 3 years old. The burial dates to around 78,000 years ago. The child was later called mtoto, which means child in Swahili, and the details are devastating. The body was placed in a pit. The child was laid on the side, curled in a careful position. The bones suggest the body may have been wrapped in a shroud. The head may have rested on something like a pillow made from material that disappeared long ago. Think about that. 78,000 years ago, someone buried a small child with care, not thrown away, not abandoned, not treated like remains to remove, laid down, possibly wrapped, possibly supported beneath the head. That is not just body disposal. That is tenderness. When humans buried a child, were they thinking about the afterlife, or were they simply doing the last thing love could still do? In a world with no writing, no photographs, no recorded voices, and no carved names, what was left after someone died? Maybe the grave was the first memory technology, a place where the living could say, "This person existed. This person was ours. This person should not simply vanish into the dirt." Now move north, to Qafzeh Cave in Iraq. Here, Neanderthal remains changed how people thought about our closest extinct relatives. For a long time, Neanderthals were imagined as brutal, simple, almost human but not fully human. Qafzeh helped destroy that image. One individual, known as Qafzeh 1, had suffered serious injuries during life. He had damage to his face, he had an injured arm. He had other conditions that would have made survival extremely difficult alone. And yet he lived for years. That means his group must have helped him. They must have fed him, protected him, allowed him to survive when he could no longer contribute like everyone else. And that matters, because care for the injured and care for the dead come from the same ancient question. What do we do with people who can no longer help us survive? Do we abandon them? Or do we keep them close because they are one of us? Qafzeh also became famous for the so-called flower burial. Pollen found near one Neanderthal skeleton once led researchers to suggest that flowers had been placed with the dead. It was a beautiful idea. Neanderthals gathering flowers in the mountains and laying them beside someone they had lost. But later research made the story more complicated. Some scientists now think the pollen may have come from bees or burrowing animals. So the flowers may not prove what people once hoped. But the deeper point remains. Qafzeh still sits at the center of debates about Neanderthal compassion, care, and treatment of the dead. More recent discoveries suggest Neanderthals may have returned to the same cave area again and again. Even if the flowers are uncertain, the care is difficult to ignore. The dead were not simply nothing. They became part of a place, a memory, a repeated behavior. And if Neanderthals treated their dead with care, then burial is not only a Homo sapiens story. It is a wider human story. Different kinds of humans, different bodies, different faces, but the same refusal to treat death as meaningless. Do you think grief belongs only to Homo sapiens, or is grief older than our species? Now move farther north, to Sungir in Russia. Around 34,000 years ago, people there created some of the most elaborate Paleolithic burials ever found. One adult male was buried with ornaments. 2 children were buried head to head. Their graves contained thousands of mammoth ivory beads, spears made from mammoth ivory, animal carvings, red ochre, and carefully made objects. Some estimates suggest the beads alone required thousands of hours of labor. Thousands of hours. for the dead. That changes everything, because now burial is no longer only a practical act. It is not only protection from animals. It is not only a hole in the ground. It is social meaning, status, memory, identity. Those beads were not made in a few minutes. Someone had to carve them, drill them, shape them, polish them, attach them, then place them with bodies that would never use them again. From a survival point of view, that seems irrational. Why spend so much labor on someone who cannot hunt, eat, trade, or speak? Unless the dead were still doing something, not physically, symbolically. The burial was speaking to the living. It may have said, this person mattered. It may have said, this family had status. It may have said, our group remembers. It may have said, death does not erase belonging. At Sungir, burial became a stage where society explained itself. And once humans learned to do that, graves became one of the strongest mirrors of culture. Look at a grave, and you can learn what a society feared, what it loved, what it believed, who it honored, who it ignored, who had power, and who did not. This is why burial appears again and again across history. In Egypt, bodies were preserved because the afterlife depended on preparation. Mummies, tombs, offerings, amulets, spells, and paintings all helped prepare a person for the journey beyond death. In Mesopotamia, families buried the dead and brought offerings because the dead were believed to remain connected to the household. In ancient China, tombs could contain food, weapons, animals, servants, and later entire armies of clay, because the next world was imagined almost like a continuation of this one. In the Americas, ancient peoples built mounds, tombs, and ceremonial spaces for the dead. Across the world, the details changed, but the pattern remained. Humans did not only dispose of bodies, they built relationships with the dead. They fed them, visited them, feared them, honored them, carried them, wrapped them, burned them, painted them, buried them with objects, marked the earth above them, returned to them, spoke their names. And this tells us something important. Burial probably began partly because bodies are dangerous. A corpse attracts predators. It creates smell. It decays. It can bring disease close to the living. So yes, burial was practical. It protected the group. It separated the living from decay. It kept scavengers away. But if practicality were the whole reason, humans would have stopped there. Dig a hole, cover the body, move on. Instead, they added meaning. They used pigment. They chose positions. They left objects. They returned to places. They made beads. They built tombs. They marked graves. That extra effort is where the story becomes human, because burial solved two problems at once: the physical problem of the body and the emotional problem of absence. When someone dies, the body remains for a while, but the person is gone. That creates a contradiction the human mind struggles to accept. They are here, but they are not here. They look like themselves, but they are not themselves. You can touch them, but they do not answer. Burial may have been one of the first ways humans managed that impossible contradiction. It gave grief a shape. Wash the body, carry the body, place the body, cover the body, return to the place. Remember, without ritual, grief is chaos. With ritual, grief becomes something the living can survive. Was burial created for the dead or for the living who had to keep going after them? And here is the deeper part. Burial required imagination. To bury someone with food, you have to imagine they might need it. To bury someone with tools, you have to imagine they remain connected to who they were. To mark a grave, you have to imagine returning. To preserve a body, you have to imagine that the person is not fully gone. Even if early humans did not believe in an afterlife the way later religions did, burial shows they were thinking beyond the immediate moment. They were thinking about memory, personhood, the future, the invisible. Other animals can mourn. Elephants return to bones. Chimpanzees react strongly to death. Whales may carry dead calves. But humans went further. We changed the landscape because of death. We made places for it. We gave it objects. We gave it color. We gave it ceremony. We made death part of culture. And once that happened, the dead never fully left human life again. They became ancestors, spirits, ghosts, kings, names, lineages, graves, monuments, stories. Even now, after all our science, we still do something ancient when someone dies. We gather. We lower bodies into the earth. We burn candles or incense. We bring flowers. We dress the dead. We speak words over them. We carve names into stone. We return to graves long after the body is gone. We know what death is biologically. The heart stops. The brain shuts down. Cells fail. The body decays. But that explanation has never been enough. Because humans do not only lose bodies, we lose voices, faces, habits, hands, laughter, stories. The person who knew us, the person we knew, and no amount of biology tells us what to do with that absence. So we do what humans have done for tens of thousands of years. We make a place for it. From Spain's pit of bones to South Africa's dark caves, from Qafzeh's red ochre to Kenya's buried child, from Shanidar's Neanderthals to Sungir's thousands of beads. Across the map of human history, one pattern keeps appearing. The dead mattered, not because they could still help the living survive, but because the living could not survive emotionally without giving death meaning. So the first grave was not just a hole in the ground, it was a line between survival and meaning. Long before writing, a grave said, "This life happened." Long before monuments, burials said, "This person mattered." Long before religion had names, humans were already kneeling beside the dead and acting as if love did not end when breathing stopped. And maybe that is why we still do it. Because burial was never only about death. It was the first human way of saying, "We remember."